Hi there! What I'm going to show you right now is how to write a level 1 history essay for the exam. I'm going to go over what's required for it and also give you some ideas about what you might do when you're looking at each of the different parts of the essay. So to start off with, you'll get a question in the exam which will be something along the lines of describe the causes and consequences of an event you've studied. Now, I've adapted a question that's from a past exam. You can find these by going onto NZQA and searching up level 1. The code for this one is 91005. I'll also give you the link to it. But what you'll find there is that some of the questions are like the one behind me. So this question, I've added the civil rights movement into here, but what you might find on the examination papers from before is that they say something like describe the most significant causes of an event you've studied and the most significant consequences of that event on people and groups, or they might go describe the most significant causes of an event you've studied. What were the impacts of this event on people and groups, something along there. But what you can expect is that it's going to be talking about causes and consequences. So you know that going in, if you've prepared 3 causes and 3 consequences, you know that you're sorted for the exam. Okay, so I've adapted the question up behind us to fit my event, and this is what you should do when you first get into the exam, is adapt the question to fit what you're talking about. So I've written, describe the most significant causes of the civil rights movement and the consequences of the civil rights movement on people and groups. So what this does is it helps me to think about what I'm going to include in my introduction. So this is where we get to what parts of the essay are going to look like. So as you know, you need to have an introduction, then you need to be talking about 3 different causes, then you talk about what happened, then you have 3 consequences, and then you have a conclusion. Now at this time it makes it sound a little bit freaky looking at how many you've got to do, but I promise you that there's 3 key things you've got to do for each of the body paragraphs, the causes and the consequences, and for the intro and the conclusion they're really straightforward as well, and the what happened. So if we start off with the intro, the first thing that you've got to make sure that you do in the intro is introduce the event you're looking at. So you should write about 2 to 4 sentences at most, which introduce the event. An example of this that I can give you is the civil rights movement and I can put my code in there that I'm going to use so I don't have to keep writing civil rights movement every time I talk about it. The civil rights movement was a time in American history where people fought for equal civil rights and to end discrimination. Okay, first sentence, I've said what my event is about. Then I'd start going into a little bit more detail. So perhaps I might go African Americans. Whoops, I'm going to go down here. African Americans. Sorry, had been discriminated against since their arrival in the USA as slaves in the 1700s. And then my next sentence might be something along the lines of linking it back to the civil rights movement. So, during the civil rights movement, African Americans united together to, what would we say here? Maybe to protest and bring about an end to the unfair treatment in society. Okay, now what I've done here is I have 3 sentences which have introduced what the event is. They're clear, they're to the point. Now, they could be worked on a little bit more. They are just kind of off the cuff a little bit. But what you get from the idea here is that, I'll just move it just slightly so you can see it a bit better. There we go. What you get is that hopefully you see that I've started to introduce it. Okay, so the first 2 to 4, we're introducing the event. Okay, now the next step, and this is where you get your last 2 sentences in this paragraph, is that you've got to bring your argument in here. So I'm going to run out of space. So what I'm going to do is rub this out. You're all right, I can rub it out. So once I've done my 2 to 4 sentences introducing the event, then I have to do, this is still in my introduction, 2 sentences, again, stating my argument. So, remembering that up here, I've got my question that I need to be answering. So, now I'm going to state my argument. So, it might go something along the lines of, and I've already picked what I'm going to do for my causes and consequences, so I know this. So, I might do, segregation the rise of the NAACP and their legal battles as well as the Montgomery bus boycott. Segregation, the rise of the NAACP and their legal battles, as well as the Montgomery bus boycott, are the most significant causes that led to the civil rights movement. Now, created my first part of the argument, made sure that I've made it clear that I'm talking about the most significant cause of the civil rights movement. Then I get on to my consequences. So, as a result of the civil rights movement, protests sprung up, or that's not a very good word, but you know, sprung. We'll go with sprung for now, but we can maybe change it later. Protests sprung up around the country. New laws were introduced, ending discrimination. Some discrimination, perhaps. And new political, oops, I'll change that. And African Americans rose to power in politics. Okay, so what I've done here is with my first 3 sentences that I wrote before, that I showed you, and now my next 2 sentences that I've done, I've created my introduction. So something along the lines of introducing what the civil rights movement is about, introducing kind of what it is, how it started, what it did, then starting to link into what I'm going to talk about in my paragraph. So segregation, the rise of the NAACP and their legal battles, as well as the Montgomery bus boycott, are the most significant causes that led to the civil rights movement. As a result of the civil rights movement, protests sprung up around the country, new laws were introduced, ending some discrimination, and African Americans rose to power in politics. from there, I've created like a punchy introduction. Now, you could do one more sentence here if you need to, but what you could just do is launch into your first paragraph, which is your first cause. Okay, so what you can see behind me is that I've now shown that we're talking about what's going to happen for each of our cause paragraphs and what's going to happen with our consequence paragraphs, okay? So the first thing that you have to do in this paragraph is you have to explain what each of these ideas are. So if you're doing, let's say segregation is your first one, so our first one here is segregation. Okay, now the first thing we've got to make sure that we do, obviously within a sentence you've got a topic sentence, so this might be along the lines of segregation was or is the most important long-term cause of the civil rights movement. Okay, this is my topic sentence. So you know with Texas, you all know Texas, this is my topic sentence. Okay, I've introduced what I'm going to talk about and I've made it clear that this is what this paragraph is about. Now, in the next few sentences, the things that I need to be doing is, and this could be, it's hard to give it a how many sentences, it's about how well you explain it. So now what we're doing is we're explaining. Okay, so we're explaining what segregation is. So, some things that we may want to do for this is you might choose to do things like when it started, sometimes there'll be things like who was involved. You might also have things like where did things that happen with segregation happen. The one that's kind of key is things like when it started, how it also started. Okay, and this could be for any of your causes that you're looking at. So if you're talking about the NAACP, you can talk about when it started, how it was started, who was involved. You might talk about where it was. You might talk about what it did. Okay, and this is part of this analysis, because if you're explaining what it did, you're starting to lead into how does it lead to your cause happening. Now within here, you've also got facts. So I'm going to do this in this beautiful orange color. Okay, so facts. So facts, what else do we have? Dates. We might have some quotes. We might have correct names. Now all of these things, this is your evidence. Okay, this is what's supporting you, showing that you know what you're talking about and you're backed up by the right things. So for here, some things that we might want to be including is some facts. We might want to talk about Plessy versus Ferguson. We might want to talk about separate but equal. We might want to talk about, what else might we want to talk about? Jim Crow laws. We might want to talk about, what else have we got? Can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sure there's other ones here. You could figure out what other ones. This is just off the top of my head, and you can see this is me kind of doing it a little bit off the cuff. Oh, we might want to talk about where the Jim Crow laws affected. So, what places? So, obviously, it would be restaurants, schools, transport. You know, you figure out, you look back over your notes and you pick which ones you're going to do. Okay, so this is the key bit. First off, we're explaining what segregation is, and throughout our explanation we're using evidence to reinforce how we explain it, what we're explaining about it. Then the next step that we've got to make sure that we've done is, so this is our first bit. So if you're following Texas, you've already got your topic sentence, you've got your explain, you've got your evidence or your examples, so that's our X. Okay, TEX. Now, this last step is analysis, or sorry, 2 more steps. Second one is analysis. So, the key thing here is tell me how segregation leads to why we have a civil rights movement. So, some of the things you might consider is, well, what did this do to people at the time? What did this do to lead to other causes? What did this do to society? All those kind of questions are what you want to think about when you're going, okay, how am I going to analyze, which is this A, how am I going to show how this led to the civil rights movement? So I might bullet point some ideas. So some things I might do is it created society that saw discrimination as okay. What else did it do? It gave African Americans something to stand up against. Which then leads to how we conclude this. Now there might be something more that you want to put for analysis, but for the time of this I'm going to start linking into then how we do a conclusion. So the last step that we want to do is our conclusion down here, so our summary sentence. Okay, we started out with a topic sentence introducing what we're talking about, we've gone to explain and we've used evidence throughout, we've shown how this leads to our event happening. You have to excuse me because I'm going to bring it down slightly just so we have a little bit more space. Okay, so now we're thinking about a summary sentence. So in here we still need to be linking it back to our event as a whole, but we're also trying to summarize what we've said here. So our summary sentence might be something along the lines of, therefore, or thus, or as a result. This makes you sound like you're really bringing it back home. Therefore, segregation can be seen as a significant cause. I'm going to come over this side. As a significant, or as the most, wanting to be really strong, most significant long-term cause of the civil rights movement due to, still putting on, it creating the discrimination in society that, we're still fitting, just that African Americans united together to challenge. Now, with my, hopefully you can see that, there we go. With my last sentence, my summary sentence there, hopefully what's become clear is that we've got our topic sentence introducing it. We've got some sentences in here which are explaining what it is. We're explaining what segregation is. We're explaining how it started. We're explaining how it came about, where it came about, if that's applicable, or what it did. So this is kind of key here. What did segregation do to society? So that's part of this analysis down here, but it's also explaining kind of what it is almost, that isn't already clear. So explaining what these things are. Then we're getting into our analysis, so really strongly showing how does our event kind of come about as a result of this cause. And then in our summary, just reinforcing again how our cause, what it is and how it contributes to our event happening as a whole. Once you've done your causes, the next thing that you need to talk about is the what happened of the event. This is before you get into the consequences, and this is really just 4 to 6 sentences which just outline what happened during your event. So some key things that you want to consider are things like key people involved, key events, key dates, maybe explaining some important ideas. So you can see up here I've started to think some ideas. So I would want to talk about MLK. I might want to talk about the non-violence methods that he promoted and that he used. I might talk about things like the protests or the sit-ins and the freedom rides, just that they occurred, because I'm going to talk in more detail about these in my consequences, but just making sure that I include some of the things that happened as a result of this movement. I might also talk about marches on Washington and how ultimately they did achieve some of their goals, which was to end discrimination in legal places when the laws were brought in place in the 1960s. And perhaps also want to talk about how Martin Luther King died towards the end of this, which kind of brought about the end of the civil rights movement as a whole, but that it still continues to affect today's society. And then that can lead into my next section, which is now talking about the 3 consequences that I have picked. So the key thing here, 4 to 6 sentences, just explaining what are some key bits of information that your reader should know about what happened during this event, so that it can make it really clear to them about why the consequences happen as a result, and also kind of what your causes have been leading to. Okay? So what you'll notice behind me is that I have removed the information up here. I've removed some key bits. The reason I want to do this is I now want to show you how you can do a consequence of it. And because we did a long-term cause before, I think maybe what we're going to look at is an immediate consequence of it, just to show you the process that we go through. Now you can change how the sentence looks. In fact, you should. There's different ways you can write it. You might change it to something like the most important immediate consequence of the civil rights movement was da 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 da, or you could do, there's a variety of ways you can change the sentence up. This blah 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 was a very important consequence of, or a very important immediate consequence of the civil rights movement, and then you figure it out. But you kind of get the idea that the sentence, you just switch it around so long as it's always answering a question. So if we come back up the top, remember we had to talk about the most significant consequences of the civil rights movement on people and groups. So we follow the same process again with our Texas topic sentence. So instead this time I'm going to pick sit-ins as my one. So I might say sit-ins were one of the most important I'm going to run out of spaces, sorry. One of the most important immediate consequences of the civil rights movement. Now, in looking at that, maybe I go, I could do I could change it to say passive resistance in cities. I could change that to say freedom rides. But really, what we're talking about here is it could be any immediate consequence that you pick as being the one you want to look at. So let's say I'm going to go sit-ins. So I'll bring it back to this. So sit-ins were the most important immediate consequences of the civil rights movement. So explain what it is. Okay, so I need to explain what sit-ins are. I need to probably talk about what a sit-in meant. I might want to talk about which were the groups that started sit-ins, so core. I want to talk about things like who was involved, which is at core. I'd want to talk about where, so Greensboro, North Carolina from memory. Talk about, again, what they did, what happened during it, okay? So they went in, they sat down, what was the process of doing that? Why go sit in these restaurants? So again, facts, dates, quotes, names, key things to include. Now we get down to analysis. So whereas before with your causes, we were looking at how it leads to the event, with analysis we're looking at what is the effect on people and groups. So how is it a consequence? How does it affect people? So for this, if I'm thinking about sit-ins, some of the things that I might talk about is how it joins more African Americans together to protest or to protest. We could call it segregation, or we could call it, oh, does it go on the screen? Oh, yep, cool. Or it might be discrimination. Okay, so it could be one of those. Then what else does it do? It gained media attention. So as a result, it meant that more people were aware. It got more support or more supporters. It sparked other ins, such as kneel-ins, all those other ones. So this is just some of the ones that I could be doing in terms of my analysis. I've explained what sit-ins were, I've got some facts and evidence in there to back myself up, my examples, and then I've done my analysis. Now again, back to my concluding sentence. So, therefore, sit-ins can be seen as the most significant, or as a, and I could change most significant, I could change it to important, as a important immediate consequence of the civil rights movement due to, and then I just summarize what I've talked about. What happened to them, the way that it was publicized, the way that people reacted, all those kind of things. Hopefully what you've seen in this so far is that these paragraphs, when you get the idea about what you need to have in them, they're actually really straightforward. So that brings us to the very last bit, which is the conclusion. So as I said, this brings us to our conclusion. So basically the conclusion is where you are rounding out your essay. You must have a conclusion. It's really important that you have both the introduction at the beginning to set out what you're going to talk about, then your paragraphs, and then the conclusion to bring home what you've actually argued. So the way to do this is that you might start with a real simple kind of argumentative, or bringing back in the argument that you've argued. So it could be something along the lines of a first sentence that you might go, this essay has demonstrated that the civil rights movement had significant causes that led to the event happening, and that it had a significant impact on people in the USA. That could possibly be what you choose to write for your conclusion first sentence. Now, that's just off the cuff again, so you could have a think about how you might really bring this together, but the first one can just be kind of going, I've talked about the civil rights movement and its causes and consequences. Then you go into showing how you actually did that. So you might start off with, say, if we did segregation up here, and then we did the NAACP, and then we did the Montgomery bus boycott, and then we did our consequence. So we did sit-ins, then we did new laws, and then we did political change. Okay, we might start by talking about our causes. So then we go into something like segregation led to a society that accepted discrimination against African Americans, or something like that. You might go, as a result, groups as the NAACP formed to challenge this, but could only address discrimination in one area, legally. It was not until the NBB that people united together to organize, strong or organized, oops, can't spell, a strong or organized challenge to this discrimination of African Americans' civil rights. Okay, so maybe something like that. So I've got my first sentence, then I've got my 3 sentences quickly just restating what I've talked about in terms of my causes. I'm building my argument again, just reinforcing what I have argued. And then you lead into your consequences. Okay, so the conclusion, probably looking at kind of 1 sentence to just like a topic sentence for your conclusion, then doing maybe 3 sentences for 1 for each of your causes, and then 3 sentences for 1 for each of your consequences. So it's probably looking at about 6 sentences in there. So 1 at the beginning, then 6 sentences, and then 1 or 2 sentences at the end that just reinforce how this event is significant or what it's done. So perhaps it could be something along the lines of the civil rights movement therefore can be seen as a significant event that created a massive had a lot of impact on people in the United States. It's one that serves to remind the world that we should respect the rights of other people and allow everyone to have equal civil rights. Something like that.